What's up, alpha males? A long time ago in a place far away, I had television. And I remember on television, there was Discovery Channel. And now it's probably reality TV or something. But back then, they may still do it. They did a thing called Shark Week. I was thinking, how about Knife Week? Maybe cool. Do a week of knife content on Alpha Male Podcast. Knives are pretty manly. And I'm going to be real with you guys. I put in the bio, but right now that's not in the older versions of the bio. I am private security contracting for the feds. Have gun, will travel. Anyway, I moved and took this job because it was supposed to be part-time, and I'm not complaining, but it's not as part-time as I thought it was going to be. So, I'll be honest, it's been a lot. So I thought, how could I get you guys some content? Do something kind of cool on here. So, how about Knife Week on Alpha Male Podcast? Pull it in. You may get an episode or two pulled over from gunfighter life as well, because knives are one of those kind of things that transcends manliness and guns. It kind of ties into both. But without further ado, Knife Week on Alpha Male Podcast. One knife to rule them all. One knife for the rest of your life. From the mundane 9-to-5 office job to peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan. From an EMP or the zombie chipmunk apocalypse. Right, whatever you envision happening. One knife. Often in the survivalist community we talk about the one long gun debate. As in like, it's grab and go time. It's peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan time. I gotta grab one long gun and get out of Dodge. Not because it's the most realistic, but because it's an awesome thought experiment as to which is the most versatile, which is the most useful, if you can only have one. It's a thought experiment, hopefully. So let's enter this thought experiment in the world of knives. If you could only have one, forget about Lay's potato chips. This is the opposite of that. You can only have one. And here's the caveat. It's got to be something that you are willing to E.D.C. Be easy to say, oh, I want a hatchet, or I want a kukri, or I want a hand-and-a-half bastard sword made out of Magna cut steel. But it has to be something you're going to E.D.C. If a major disaster happens so quickly, while you're in your cubicle or out and about, out for a walk, and it's so big that by the time you get back to your vehicle, it's been looted. So that's not an option. You don't have time to get back to your house. You and or your loved ones have to rendezvous at a pre-designated rendezvous point, which hopefully you have. And whatever you have on you is what you have. So this knife has to be something you're willing to E.D.C. every day. And also, if it was your one knife heading out into the zombie wasteland, right, you would be okay with it. Obviously, you'd want more. And obviously, it's not the only part of your E.D.C. But that's kind of the overarching idea, and that's a pretty long intro. Welcome to Alpha Male Podcast, the podcast where we talk about what it means to be a man, the right way, with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values. And we make no apologies for that. Alright, so let's talk about this. Now, years ago, when I was the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters, I had for years had my E.D.C. be a folding knife in my pocket. Probably like many people. And I thought doing some ground fighting and stuff and wrestling, doing some CQB, and a lot of fights end up on the ground, whether or not you're armed. And doing that, I thought there's a good chance if I only have one hand and I can't get to my gun and I have to get to my knife and deploy it, I may be able to deploy it with one hand, I may not. Or I may not have the time. A fixed blade makes a lot more sense. And I got to thinking about it, being a survivalist and a prepper, it makes a lot more sense anyway. I'm a big fan of simple. And really, what's more simple than a fixed blade knife. There are some really strong locking knives, and we'll talk about that. But my first choice for this would be a fixed blade. Well, what got me kind of thinking about this is the one that I already had that was on my like baby bug out bag, and I thought, let me try carrying a fixed blade. Well, that was a Tops Iraq Jack. The Tops Iraq Jack. It's a good, small, all-around fixed blade knife. It's not crazy big. It's got somewhere to 3 or 4 inch blade. Thing is built like a tank. I'm sure you could break it, but I would hate to see how. I'm sure like most of their knives, not all, but it's probably 1095, which is a good robust steel. Not the most weather resistant, but a good robust steel. It's got a good full-sized, full grip handle and a good all-around drop point blade. Before I started carrying it as my E.D.C, it was on my baby bug out bag, and my wife and I saw the car in front of us. It was a family. They struck a deer, and I got out and I think I asked if they were okay, and then, are you going to eat that? Right? We're on a pretty long road trip too, but you can't really pass up good venison backstrap. So I think I shot the deer, put it out of its misery, or slit its throat. It was still alive. They didn't want the deer, so I figured, hey, free venison. Anyway, I used that knife to make a point. And I think that is a really good, assuming you're a hunter and are into that, that's a really good litmus test for an E.D.C knife. Not the only one, but can you process a deer with it? Could you process a whole deer with it? Now, if you had to, you could process a whole deer with a disposable razor blade. But you get what I'm saying. Like, you could do it and it wouldn't be burdensome. And I did that with this knife, and it was one of my go-to carries, again, as the commander of a tactical team, and it was designed as a defensive knife, like as the name suggests, as like a knife on a plate carrier or on a war belt. It's a decent defensive tool, and I think that kind of embodies this. If I only had that knife, if that was my one knife, I'd say, okay, I'm fine with that. I'm cool with that. And I realize a lot of people don't E.D.C a fixed blade knife, but I'm going to give you some options. The classic one is just to carry it on your belt, which is what I'm doing right now with a different knife, which we'll get to later. A way that I carried this knife and other knives for years, because I might work over, I might work covert, was my E.D.C knife. And a lot of times I would conceal carry, and when I got to work, I would throw on my war belt. And some of our missions we would work covert, meaning like in plain clothes, whether a 3-piece suit or a pair of old jeans and a hoodie. Anywhere from an upscale businessman to a homeless person, depending on what the mission dictated as far as blending in. Well, some ways that you can easily E.D.C a fixed blade knife. An ulti-clip, spelled with a U. An ulti-clip or something like it, if your knife has a modern sheath, meaning like Kydex with grommets, you attach that and put it inside your pocket. I prefer my knife almost always on my non-dominant side, because I almost always carry a concealed carry gun or a full-size fighting handgun, open carry, concealed carry on my dominant side. So I like a defensive option or a fighting option on either side of my body in case an arm is shot, broken, whatever it is. So in my weak side pocket, you can slip that in with the ulti clip, and you can kind of tuck it in along the seam of your pants, whether they be nice suit dress pants or khakis or whatever, and you can tuck that knife in so it goes along the seam. And is it technically visible? Yes, but really nobody's going to notice any more than a pocket clip on a knife. You get the ulti clip sticking out, which is a very small clip. Again, it looks like a regular pocket clip, and that handle generally runs up the seam and blends in very well. Also make other clips that you can clip onto the sheath and even go all the way down in your pocket. I prefer the ulti clip method, but that's about it. You could have it where you just put the knife in your pocket with no clip and it just is in your pocket. I like that less because if I'm stressed or getting attacked and I need to grab that knife, or if I need to just grab it to cut something free and I'm under stress, I like to have it always oriented in the same direction. So for that, I recommend the other methods. But you get the idea. You can, and if you haven't, I recommend you try carrying a fixed blade knife. Anyway, the Iraq Jack is a great all-around knife. However, I transitioned away from it because that thing is a tank. It's not a big knife, but it's a heavy knife. It is thick. Like I said, I'd hate to see what you'd have to do to break it. You could probably shove that knife through a Terminator 2 meets Jurassic Park kind of AI robot meets dinosaur skull, and it would be fine. The thing is way overbuilt, which makes it pretty heavy. After that, I went to a Tops Mini Tracker. Now, if you're not familiar with the Tracker in general, it's a pretty unconventional kind of knife, but I figured I would get it because it was much thinner than the Iraq Jack, lighter, but about the same blade size, and I thought I would get it and try it. Maybe it's a gimmick, maybe that knife design, that blade design, which is very unconventional, is just a gimmick, and I'll try it for a little bit, and if I don't like it, I'll go away from it. I really like that knife. It is still one of my go-to E.D.C knives. Not my main one anymore, but it is a great knife, and especially for like super small concealed carry of a fixed blade knife. It's light, it's thin, it's handy, and it's a great utility knife. Decent size for defense. If I had to use it to skin a deer, I wouldn't be upset about it. With that blade design, it's kind of like having several different blades in one. You could have like a draw knife if you're working with wood or something like that. Making kindling. It's got a saw on the back, which is not just like a gimmick saw. It actually will cut stuff. I think one of the first days I used it, I used a saw on it. It worked quite well. I was pretty impressed with it. And although it's made for like the wilderness, I was using it in an urban setting as leading a tactical team. And it's good for all kinds of environments. And it's good. It's a much thinner blade profile as far as the steel goes, which is light and handy. It blends in really well. I'll probably get into later tricking out my E.D.C knives and things I like to attach to them. But even just that knife with an ulti-clip in the pocket is fantastic. It's a fantastic option. The one after that, and just a fantastic knife. White River Firecraft. The White River Firecraft is just a phenomenal balance of a great E.D.C fixed blade knife. It's super strong. They make it in different steels. The one that I have is S35VN, which is not even like the top end that they make as far as steel go. But just a phenomenal, just all-around knife. And kind of the epitome of this episode. If that was the only knife that I had for the rest of my life, there's really nothing I couldn't do with it. It is a phenomenal knife. And again, that's a White River Firecraft. One of the cool things about it is that it has a little like half moon notch cut out of the back of the blade for running a ferrocerium rod, and it comes with a ferrocerium rod attached to the sheath, and that's really handy. I will generally carry my E.D.C knife with a ferro rod on it for obvious reasons. A ferrocerium rod, if you don't know, is for starting fire, and again, that's kind of made for wilderness bushcraft type stuff, but I started running one of those when I was leading a tactical team to stop active shooters. It's a good fighting knife size option, handle size, full grip. Ironically, probably as good or better a fighting knife than the Iraq Jack. Just a phenomenal option. And a really good knife. Again, if I had that as my only knife, I would not be upset. Now, what did I carry before I got into EDCing a fixed blade knife? Well, I carried for years and years, my go-to was a Gerber 06 Auto. Now, if you say, I'm not going to carry a fixed blade knife for EDC, it's just not me, I'm not going to do it, but I'll carry a folding knife. If you live in a state with some freedom and you can carry a automatic, because as the name implies, it's an automatic, which some states will call a switchblade or whatever, and sometimes that's a felony. Sometimes you can carry a loaded gun that's a misdemeanor, but you carry a switchblade knife and it's a felony, as in California. So really make sure they're legal in your area. But the Gerber 06 Auto is a tank of a knife. You can lock it open, you can lock it closed, and locking it open makes a lot of sense if you're doing some really hard use with it. It's not a light knife. In fact, it weighs a lot more probably than many of the fixed blade options that I talk about, which is why I don't really carry one anymore. But the Gerber 06 Auto, the ones that I had were S30V, which is a great super steel. Kind of a baseline super steel that's phenomenal. In fact, when I first got one, I bought one used because they were really expensive, and I thought, why would somebody pay this much for a knife when they could just get a $20 Walmart Gerber knife? This is also a Gerber, but made in America and with that really good steel, and that really kind of opened my eyes to how much better a super steel can be, or a really good premium quality steel, just how long they stay sharp, how well they perform. Again, I carried one of these for years and years. They make several different blade profiles, pick your flavor. They make just a traditional kind of clip point, straight edge blade. They make semi-serrated. They make Tonto blades, which is a great like urban blade style. And again, it's a tank. It's a big, heavy knife, but it's a folding knife. You could fit it in most standard pockets. And again, I prefer a fixed blade, but if that was my one knife, I would be happy with it. They're a tank. They're a beast. I would not be worried about that thing breaking. You can lock it open. So if I'm going to use it for a long period of time and I want a big knife, I just lock it open, and it's essentially a fixed blade. It's a little bit more complicated, but again, I have confidence in that system of it working and working well. And if you're getting the crap beat out of you on the ground and you need to open it one-handed, that, automatic feature is nice. And again, I carried one for years. Now, if you live, and this is one that I don't have first-hand experience with, but seems really good, and I think it's Crewware steel, which I believe is a better steel. But they make a non-auto, it's called the Adamas, or Adamas, however you pronounce it. Make a regular and a mini, so even if it's about the same size as the Gerber 06 Auto, but it's not an auto. So if you want one like this, that would be a really good one knife option. That Adamas or mini Adamas, if you don't even want one that big, I think I would be fine with that. They also, if you want to carry a bigger fixed blade knife, they make a regular Adamas. Well, I think the original was just a fixed blade, simple knife. Talk about simple. Just a piece of coated steel. It's not got any handles or anything fixed to it. It's just a big chunk of steel. Handle, blade, everything. And talk about like end of the world, simple, one and done. Again, a lot of people aren't going to carry a knife that big on them. I think that regular fixed blade Adamas weighs more than the other options that I talked about. And what I want you to take away from this is not these models are the only ones, right? I mentioned most of those because they're ones that I have real-world first-hand experience with. And there's a lot of knives that I recommend, like for a go-to, like day-to-day, E.D.C, my number one recommendation, and has been for years, that most people are going to carry, is a Buck 110 Slim. It's a phenomenal all-around knife. Certainly passes the deer dressing test. In fact, it was one of my go-to carries when I was a professional big game hunter and guide. It's a little thin. I don't know if I would want that knife as my one go-to end-of-the-world knife. But for 90% of everything else day-to-day, it's a phenomenal choice. And Buck makes some really good fixed blade knives. A lot of them are classic ones, though I don't think they pass the test for an E.D.C because they're just too big. The handles are kind of fat. Like the classic Buck 119, it's like the epitome of a classic hunting survival knife. But probably a lot of people aren't going to E.D.C that. Now, they do make one that intrigues me called the Pack Light. That looks like a really decent E.D.C and would be a good one-and-done option. And they make one that I think looks even better, and that's the Buck Compadre. It looks like a really, really good all-around option if you were just going to have the one knife. But again, and if you look at these different knife models, I'm not telling you have to pick one of these models. You might know of a knife that I don't even know of that's better. And this is not telling you should get your one knife and throw all of your knives in the trash. What I am trying to illustrate is that your core E.D.C, I think, is important because you never know what's going to happen. That's kind of the point of E.D.C, right? And if something really bad happens and you are stuck with whatever you have on you, right? If that's what you have to survive X, whatever X is, whether it's a short-term acute thing or a long-term chronic decay and collapse, and you get separated from whatever, your vehicle, your support system, you're far away from home on a business trip, and your core E.D.C is what you have. And that knife, and that shouldn't be the only part of your E.D.C. I've done whole episodes on E.D.C. I'll probably do another one soon. But if that knife is what you have, are you like, okay, this knife can pretty much do anything I need it to do? Whether that's ground fighting, defense, skinning a deer, building a shelter, right, period. That's kind of the main takeaway, because your core EDC is important. I'd rather you have one really good core EDC knife that you actually carried and had on you than a bag or a chest collection of knives at home. But then your EDC is some non-locking, folding, old-timer, sod-buster knife, which is a fine little pocket knife, but that would not be the one knife that I wanted. Right? That is not a decent fighting knife. That is not a great knife for doing heavy utility work. I know, because I had one fold on my fingers and I had to get stitches because somebody handed it to me. And my fault, check your gear, right? But somebody handed it to me to do a task, and I assumed it was a locking knife. And I shoved down on the blade and it folded back on my fingers. That was a bad day. But that illustrates the point. If I had one knife to do everything I needed to do, it wouldn't be one of those non-locking old-timer knives. And I'm not knocking old-timer the brand, but a lot of those classic knives, they just have that slip joint, kind of holds it open, but it doesn't lock. That's not what I would want for my one knife. Now, I take it over nothing, but you get my point. And that's kind of how I want you to think about this. Now, I'm going to throw out a wild card, and then I'll tell you what my current is. Now, the wild card is going to be your multi-tool. My big recommendation for this is going to be a Leatherman Signal. They're urban or rural. There's a lot of good uses for a multi-tool. I did EDC for a while. I still EDC'd a fixed blade knife, and then on top of that, I would carry the Leatherman Signal. I did a whole video on that, on tricking out the Leatherman Signal. I did some time in the backcountry out in Salmon, Idaho, living out in the bush, in the wilderness, and I've carried it a lot. It's a great thing to have. And if you're going to carry a fixed blade knife and this, I would say that's a good option. But that's not really the idea of today's discussion. It's really, really good for like the MacGyver style survival stuff. Like, oh, I found an old extension cord and I need to make cordage, or I need to make a rope. Got my multi-tool, I can cut it, I can trim it. It's fantastic for that. I found some old wire in a ditch, and I'm going to use that to make a shelter. Use that to lash poles together. Fantastic. But it really fails kind of the defensive tool test, because if I need a blade right now to defend my life with, it's not really intuitive to deploy. So it kind of fails that sniff test for me. But a really good option if you're going to have, even if it's just a small like bird and trout fixed blade pick, for lack of a better term, super ultra light, and that's your defensive go-to in your pocket. You're going to have this multi-tool, which probably weighs about the same, but it's a dual option. I'd say fantastic, but it kind of fails that defensive tool test. Now, if you listen to this and you're a pacifist, I'm surprised, but hey, that's on you. If you're never going to use it for defense, there's a lot, obviously, of utility in a multi-tool, and that's not the only one, but the Leatherman Signal is kind of geared towards survival, so it's a great option, and it's a great like addition to your EDC, like a line 2 and a small bug out bag or something. It's a phenomenal choice for that. Now, my current EDC, and has been for a long time, started carrying it in Alaska. And a big reason I'll carry this, I'll be honest, is that my wife got it for me, and it has sentimental value. And not just because my wife got me a knife, because my wife actually listened. I was doing a podcast, and she actually listened to it about a good go-to knife. And I have a Tops Tracker number 1. That thing is a beast. It is far too big for most people to practically everyday carry. And I have the Mini Tracker. And I was talking about how something in the middle would be phenomenal. Well, she got me a Tops Tracker number 3. And if you're willing to carry a knife this size, it's my current EDC, and it has been for months. And I don't foresee anything replacing it most of the time, anytime soon. There are 4 different sizes of Tops Trackers. Anyway, the 3 is really good. Now, how I carry it, generally when I conceal carry, I carry a full-size fighting handgun on my belt, strong side. On my support side belt, I carry an extra magazine and a magazine pouch on my belt, and then right behind that, I carry the Tops Tracker number 3. It works out rather well because the weight of the knife and the spare magazine kind of equal out the weight of the gun on the other side, which is kind of better than just carrying a gun on one side, because even though it will be less weight overall, it's kind of lopsided and all your weight is on one hip instead of being evenly distributed. So it works out rather well. And again, that's a Tops Tracker number 3. It's a phenomenal choice. Again, if you're not familiar with the Tops Tracker, you might want to look it up, but it's kind of like having several blades in one. The one lackluster thing about it, it has finger grooves. I can't stand finger grooves. I wish they would have died in the 90s, like so much other 90s fashion, but I don't like guns with finger grooves. I don't like knives with finger grooves. This knife has finger grooves. They're not horrible. They're not like crazy pronounced like some knives, but I prefer it didn't have them. But it's a phenomenal all-around choice. So I carved into those some extra grip, making a little bit more texture. So I carved into it and colored it. Also put a small lanyard on the back so you can choke back on it and use it as a chopper. It's not as good as a machete, but it's a chopping tool. You can definitely do some chopping with it. I have used it to process a deer, and I was blessed to notch my deer tag this year. It checks that box. It's a phenomenal choice. Also, I would get to this later. I've done a whole short videos on this and everything. I don't do a lot of videos, but maybe I'll put a link to the video or videos that I've alluded to in the show notes. But attached to the sheath, because I'm carrying the sheath anyway, I have a very small fixed blade knife attached to this much bigger knife, and that is the Doug Ritter Mark V. And when I say tiny, it's tiny. But sometimes it's a lot handier to have a very small knife to do tasks than a very large knife. So having that other backup knife on there is an option. Now you might call that cheating, but I mean, if you got rid of that little knife, I'd still be happy to have this one knife. Also on there, I carry a Tops whistle. If you're not familiar with the Tops whistle, it's flat. It's got a very distinct sound. It kind of sounds like a really loud train whistle. So you're not going to mistake it for something else. It's a really good whistle. I carry what I would consider like a full-size ferrocerium rod for getting a fire going. Who knows how many fires you could start with that, but maybe not a lifetime, but probably a decade's worth of fires just with that ferrocerium rod, whether it gets wet or anything else. Also wrapped around there is Spectra. Spectra is kind of like super fishing line. Regular fishing line would be fine too, but Spectra is far stronger. They say it's stronger than steel. You might know it as spider wire. I don't remember if it's that brand or something else, but super strong fishing line with a fish hook tucked into the sheath so it doesn't poke anybody or myself, with quite a length of Spectra on there for obviously for fishing. Also, I could get rid of the barb on there, grind it down on a rock, use it for needle and thread to patch a bag or pants or something that I needed to sew if I needed to sew with it. Also, if I really had to, I could put it in some boiling water, sterilize it, cut the barb off, and make some stitches. One of the cool things about that Tops Tracker is that you have a really deep notch on the back of the blade you can use for like getting hot pots and things out of a fire. It's incorporated into the saw, but you can also use it to move back and forth to snap a piece of metal. So if I had to, I could make a straight needle with that fish hook. Again, for sewing or for sutures or for whatever. Also on the back, where the two clips are, which I'll get to in a second, I have a length of fire cord. Now, fire cord is like 550 cord with a bonus. It has a flammable, waterproof wick in there that you can use to start and maintain a fire. So some extra fire starting material in there. Also some extra 550 cord. And I have two Ranger bands around there. The Ranger bands not only help keep everything in place, Ranger bands burn really long and really hot. If I'm in nasty, cold, wet conditions, like the Alaska rainforest, which is places I've been and lived out in the wilderness, right? It can be hard to start a fire in the rainforest, obviously. There's also some micro cord, which is thicker than fishing line, but quite a bit smaller than 550 cord, doesn't weigh much. That's attached to there. And I have a little button compass on there. Now, the button compass, I'll have to take it off to use it because obviously the ferrocerium rod and the knife blade will interfere with true north. But I have a way to navigate should I need it. And all that stuff on there may sound like a lot, but it doesn't really add much to the overall profile of the knife. Oh, I don't know if I mentioned in the small titanium, I carry a small titanium pill container on there. In there, I carry water purification tablets, at least 10, which is not a lifetime supply, but good to have if I don't have time to boil water, or the water I don't think is clean, or to clean a wound, or many other things. iodine, and why not have the titanium container itself is very small and takes up very little space and doesn't weigh much. Likewise, those tablets don't weigh much, and I often do use that when I'm out in the backcountry. Like if I just want a drink of water with a container, I throw one of those tabs in there. It's a good way to get clean drinking water. And I'll often use it on my E.D.C knife because it's part of my E.D.C anyway, and then when I get back after I've done that a couple of times, I refill it. And you may think this is crazy, but on the back of there currently is a small E.D.C Bible. And when I say small, I mean small. And it's not a full Bible, it's just some key verses. My wife got it for me for our anniversary. When I say tiny, I mean it's tiny. It's like the size of an old Matchbox, but much, much thinner and smaller. And it fits right along there. Again, doesn't really add anything to the form factor of the knife. And for a while, I scout carried the knife, which is really good if you're just hiking and you don't have a pack. But if you have a pack with like a waist strap, it kind of rubs. And if you're getting it out of a car, it kind of stinks to scout carry. It has two clips, and what I'll usually do is, instead of mounting it, if you're not familiar with scout carry, it's like in the small of your back, horizontal, I'll mount it vertical. Again, just behind my magazine pouch, and it just hangs there. And if I want to scout carry it, I flip it up to the other clip, so it has two clips, and they'll spin, and I can orient it either way. Anyway, that's my current E.D.C setup, and if, again, kind of the main point is not that you should get this knife and configure it exactly like this, right, because I'm not so vain as to think that everybody should do exactly what I do, or that my choice is the best choice for you. But the main point and takeaway is this E.D.C knife that I'm about to clip back on my belt after talking about it. I'm in northern Idaho. I was out hunting last night. If something were to happen and I was out and that was what I had, that was the knife that I had, I'd say, okay, I'm good with that. Would it be the best in every situation? No, of course not. It's a compromise. It's one knife. If one knife was best for everything, everybody would just own that one model of knife and nobody would own anything else. But it's a good choice. So the main takeaway is your E.D.C knife. Is it a good choice? If it was your one knife. If you carry more than one knife for E.D.C, again, I do, and good for you, but your main, whatever your main E.D.C knife is, your main E.D.C knife, would you be happy with that? Or would you think this thing's a little bit cheap and flimsy, maybe I should get something else? Now, there's no perfect choice for one knife to rule them all, but there's definitely some bad choices, I think. So, just some food for thought. Now, your tactical tip of the day, I don't want it to have anything to do with knives, because I've given you a lot of stuff like that you can do with knives. This is a tip, to be fair, I got it from Ron Hood. Ron Hood is like one of the OG modern survival guys. And it's about land navigation. There are many ways to do land navigation, but the crescent moon, if you don't know, when you see a crescent moon, if you take the top of the tip of the crescent moon to the bottom, it'll be at a slight angle. That angle, if you draw a straight line down to the ground, that points south. That is awesome. That very well might save your life. As cool as guns and knives and stuff are, not everything can be solved with that. If you've ever been lost in the wilderness at night, and I have, and it's not a great place to be, I have almost died like that. I've also just been miserable like that. This is a great tip. Now, it's not exactly south. It's not going to be as good as a compass. It's not going to be as good as a Garmin or a Bushnell backtrack, right? But it's a lot better than nothing. So if you draw a straight line from the tip of the top of that crescent moon to the bottom and draw it down to the ground, that should be roughly south. That is a great tactical tip. Again, I learned that from Ron Hood, to give credit where credit is due. I'm sure he learned it from somebody else, but that's sometimes I can remember where I learned stuff, and if I do, I like to pass that on. Talking about finding your way at night. This is a verse that I read this morning that stuck with me. Psalm 119. Psalm 119 is the longest psalm in the Bible. It's a beautiful psalm about many things, but it focuses on the importance of the Word of God and how good the Word of God is. His commands, His judgments, His rulings, His Word. This verse, your Word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Talking about physical navigation in this world, spiritual navigation, being on the right path. Having a discernible way that we should go. That is, if you've ever felt lost in life, and not lost in the wilderness, like actual physical wilderness, but lost in the wilderness of life in general. Finding your way, the true way, is what is more important than that. Your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Just a small part of Psalm 119. Thanks for listening, men, and have a blessed day.